webinar, which is eagerly awaited by a lot of us, including me. And the reason for that is not far to see. Professor Phil Zerello, as he's affectionately called Z or Phil, is an extraordinary teacher. He also brings a tremendous amount of energy to the classroom. I've seen it multiple times, and students love him. And in fact, he loves students. That's the reason for his existence in the academics. He could have actually been a corporate honcho in the US or anywhere he chose to. And in some of his earlier avatars, he was on the boards of many companies. But I think what brings him to the classroom is love for students. Okay, by way of a formal introduction, he is currently the Deputy Dean at ISB and looks after corporate and international relationships. That's a bit of an understatement because he has some 9 portfolios, major portfolios of the institute that work with him. Prior to this, immediately prior, he was in the Singapore Management University as Dean for Graduate Studies. And before, that was for a good stint of about 8 years. And his total stint in Asia has been about 10 years plus. And he's actually a lover of Asia. I've got to know him quite closely over the last few weeks, thanks to COVID. And we've been talking, and he loves Asia, and that's something which is quite phenomenal. Before his romance with Asia, he was at the University of Texas at Austin in the Faculty of Marketing. He was a graduate dean and dean exec education. His areas of specialization are distribution channels, brand management, strategy, counterfeiting effects on brands and brand valuation. He's published extensively in the Journal of B2B Marketing, Journal of Academy of Management Sciences, Marketing Science, then Business Horizons, Relationships in Marketing. He has won many research and teaching awards. He also won the Outstanding Paper of the Year award in the Journal of B2B Marketing. As you can expect, a person of his stature has a very busy consulting schedule, and he has consulted for high-tech industries, consumer products, medical services, pharma, food and agriculture industries, industrial products, oil and gas, office supplies, and many more. So without further ado, we hand over to him, and he's going to speak on a very important topic. In a nutshell, it is something which a lot of organizations unfortunately underestimate, which is the importance of selling. A lot of MBAs also run after marketing jobs because that's more glamorous. But what his basic hypothesis for today evening is sales as a process and developing a selling mindset, which is very important for companies. Over to Phil.
Thank you, DVR. Boy, you talk about me nicer than my mother ever did. But that's what happens. That's what happens when you're the 5th kid in a family of 6. I was just happy if they were talking about me. So look, everybody, let me just start this talk by saying, this is a very simple concept. And I'm going to, throughout the talk today, what I want to do is I want to, first of all, I want to give you a little bit of background on the topic. Then I'm going to talk about the sales process, and I'm going to link the sales process to the buying process. Because you know what, the sales process tends to be a somewhat internally focused set of activities. We look at our firm and we say, what do we need to do? Whereas the buying process is more of a look from the consumer side at the selling process. Then what I'm going to do is talk about the management tools that are available to us. I'm going to talk about one tool in particular, and then I'm going to give you an example that comes from the case that I wrote. Now, the case that I wrote, unfortunately, is not a business-to-business example, but I think you'll be able to see the applications for almost any business that you're in. Okay, so let me just get started and plow right in. So what I'd like to do is talk about the basic sales process and the steps in the sales process. Now look, when you look at what people talk about and when they try to enhance the efficiency of their sales organization, what they're always doing is looking at the sales process and saying, how can we get better in all of these steps of the process? Now, look, just very simply, there's usually a step where we talk about prospecting or lead management. There's once we get prospects, we get ready for a call. So we do some pre-call planning. Then what we do is we go out on the call, or we make the telephone call, or we do a presentation of some sorts, whether it's on video today, or whether it was in person, or whether it was on the telephone. But there's some sort of presentation and commitment, and then we have a follow-up where we either ask people for we continually ask them if there is a need for more information or search for a decision, or if they have bought or purchased, we're calling them to see how they're doing, or things like this. So very simply, the sales process for most firms, they break it down and they'll look at it as kind of a 4-step process. Now look, from firm to firm, this gets bastardized or it mutates, and we can take any one of these boxes and we can blow the box up. So if I take, the lead generation box, I might say, okay, there's the question of, okay, where does the lead generation come from? Okay, and I might look at methods of generation. I might look at who's responsible for generating. I might look at metrics to see whether we're doing a good job generating leads, whether we're not doing a good job, whether we're talking to the right list. So, these sort of things, could be, diagnostically or more fine-grained approach on the lead generation process itself. Then what we would do is we could say, okay, we generate leads, then we have to qualify them and distribute them. And all of this takes place ahead of the pre-call planning, right? And we could get even more so, right? Where we increase the number of steps over and over and over again. It's just a matter of how detailed we want each step to be. And when we dig into each step, right? If we dig into lead generation, where do we start to go? Well, we start to say, well, what are all the different ways that we could generate a lead? Now, depending on your industry, depending on, the type of consumers that you have or customers that you have, okay, you could get your leads from a whole host of different areas. It could be referrals, trade shows, advertising, seminars, et cetera, right? And there's a lot of ways for us to get leads. And this is how we get a pool of leads. Now, any organization I've ever worked with, or any organization that I have been a director of or worked in, it's always been a kind of a balancing act. That you want these leads, but you also recognize that there has to be a cost to these leads and generating them, and you don't want these leads to cost you legs and arms to get them. And then we also have to recognize that there's a quality of leads, right? And we want the greatest quality we can get in the leads that we have. So a lead that's a bad lead is often a very expensive proposition for our firm, because our salespeople are among the most highly paid people in the organization. Okay, they're the true boundary spanners in your organization, and they're the ones that create a great deal of your revenue. And you don't want them going out calling on low quality leads. Aside from the fact that it's not a productive use of those resources, it also has the tendency to demoralize them, to help them to lose their morale and incentives and things like this. So we always have to recognize that we always want to make sure we want as high a quality and as low a cost as we can possibly get. Okay, now once we get leads, okay, we generally need to qualify them. And the qualification is a way of driving the quality of the lead. So does the lead have a need for our service? Can they pay? Do they have the authority? These are the kinds of questions that we're inevitably asking as we begin to qualify leads. And usually what we will do is rate those leads, okay? Where an A-rated lead is a lead that, can buy immediately, has the approval, their technology fits with our technology. It's got all of these things that are make them an ideal prospect for us. Now, to the extent that some of these characteristics begin to slip, maybe it's not 30 days, but it's maybe within a quarter they can buy, or maybe they're somewhat compatible, but there's some technical issues that need to be changed. The person is not the buyer, or it doesn't have the complete authority to make the decision. It has to go to somebody else. Well, to the extent that these things begin to slip, usually within firms, we change from A's to B's to C's to D's, and whatever that is within your organization. So usually when we're starting to look at what was once a very simple process back here, okay, it can get very, very complex in a hurry. And all of us within our firms try to do this, right? We try to diagnose or dissect the process and start looking at the activities that we have control of. And we begin to start trying to get greater efficiency in our selling process, okay? And then what we do is we distribute those leads to the people who within our organization we think are best able or best suited to do something about them. Now, that person could be internal to our organization, or we may say, look, we don't want to send our salespeople out there. We want to send our distributor, our outfitter, our stockist, our whatever that intermediary is, that we might have channel members which are better suited to work on this. Now, look, I started doing a lot of Salesforce automation consulting way back in the day, in the early days, around the turn of the century, so to speak. That sounds kind of odd to be saying nowadays, around the turn of the century. But, you know, back in the late 90s, people like Accenture, they started to fund these companies like Siebel and what have you. And what they were doing is constantly building sales automation software. And that was being built with the idea of trying to ensure that all leads were seen, that they were recognized, that they were acted upon, and all of this happened in a timely fashion. Because what they recognized is that if people were called upon, if people were called upon in a timely manner, the results just the results from the sales effort just enhanced in terms of the effectiveness. So this was a big movement or a big groundswell within the marketing and the management domains and within the organizations. They really began to automate these processes. Okay, so firms were constantly looking at ways to bring down the cost of their leads, and also to improve the time that it took to act on them. Now, I'm just going to skip ahead, okay? But a lot of time is spent on our pre-call planning. Once we've qualified the leads, we hopefully know what the person wants, what they need, you know, who they're buying from today, where have they been buying, what have they been paying, what prices are they willing to pay. Okay, and what we're looking to do is to understand their background or understand their need so that we can make the best presentation that we possibly can. Now, look, when I grew up and when I was taught to sell, this is what we did. Okay, you would go in, you would ask some diagnostic questions of the client, and you would try to find out why were they there? What was it they needed? What did they want? You know, I used to sell health club memberships once upon a time. And when somebody walked into a gym, it could be any one of three reasons why they were there. They were looking for a social place to hang out at. They could be looking to come and gain a lot of muscle tissue and become anaerobically very strong, muscular, change their body structure. Or a lot of people were coming in for anaerobic benefits. They wanted to increase their respiratory system. They wanted to increase their alertness, their flexibility, things like this. So you would generally ask people, why are you here? What are you trying to do? Do you want to gain weight? Do you want to lose weight? Do you want to get stronger? Do you want to be more cardiovascularly fit? Right? So these are the kind of things that we always did, and we always taught people to improve their efficiency in the selling process. Okay? Now look, a lot of accounts that we call on in a business to business zone, we're either selling new products to new customers. And in that case, right, a lot of this questioning, a lot of this pre-call planning has to take place because we've got a new product, the client might not know a lot about it, and we've got a new client and we don't know a lot about them. So as we search for a way to sell this product to them, we spend a lot of time looking for tools that help us to shortcut to be able to give the best available presentation possible. Okay. Now, on the other hand, there's some accounts that you just sell the same products to the same customers year in and year out. In those replacement or replenishment or account maintenance selling situations, it's less about knowing about the customer. You know the customer, and it's less about informing the customer about your product's capabilities and needs, because they already are buying the product. They know your product. They know what it can do. So most of your time is keeping alert for big problems. What might change in the very near future? And this is where we spend our time in these kinds of calls. Okay, so this is really kind of the selling process from the firm's side. So from the firm side, what they do is they spend a great deal of time, thinking about how to get to that sales presentation and make the best presentation. Now, once the presentation is done, then it's much about, follow-up. What kind of sales calls, or if we made the sale, customer service, warranty work, field repairs, proactive follow-up. What are we going to do, right? And so this is where the sales process has generally led us, okay? So the takeaway from all of this very, very quickly is that sales is a process, okay? It's a process like any other process in your organization. And while a lot of people believe that salespeople are just created, there really is a process or a series of steps that we're always going through. Now, it may not be that the salesperson goes out and generates their own leads. In many organizations that I've consulted with, my job has been to be able to deliver or develop a very structured lead generation unit for the organization. Because you don't want your salespeople, who maybe cost you $400 per sales call, to be spending their time making telephone calls. Instead, you put that down to a lower cost resource who goes out and calls potential prospects in the marketplace and qualifies them, and then brings the qualification sheet to the salesperson. So sales is a process, and it needs to be structured, and it needs to be managed, right? And what I find is that when we do a poor job of this, our very, very expensive, very important revenue generators, which is our salespeople, wind up wasting a lot of their valuable time and a lot of their valuable psyche out there on leads that are just not going to go anyplace. Okay, so what happens is organizations need to have the right people in the right place with the right information. And this is what the internal sales processes tend to look at. Now, a lot of times we talk about things like a sales funnel, okay? And that we recognize that, look, if we don't have a qualified lead that goes into this funnel, nothing's gonna come out the other end. Very few people. I remember my first boss on my first sales job when I was a 20-year-old kid. The boss said to me, he says, look, he said, I've never seen an arm come out of the telephone and sign a contract. So you make sure that that person comes in here before you give them any of the pricing information and things like this. Now, what he recognized is that there was a funnel. People needed to get interested. They needed to come. They needed to see our product. They needed to be convinced of the product. And that there was this series of steps that we were going to go through, right? So most firms have a bit of a sales funnel, and they'll say, how many prospects do you have? How many prospects have you made a presentation to? Of the prospects that you've made a presentation to, how many have been followed up on? And they're using this as a way of structuring the sales process, but they're also using it as a way to forecast. I've been in organizations while consulting that very often look at the number of presentations that have been made and bids that have been sent out to the customer. And then what they do is they ask the salespeople to give a probability of success. And this is how they roll up their sales forecast, is by discounting that number somewhat. Okay. So this is a typical internal process that what we would see. And as I say, it is internally focused. Now, if I look at this process or the sales funnel, again, very often it's a question of, well, how many prospects do we have? How many leads do we qualify? And then we begin to understand within our organization that we have certain relationships that begin to pop out. Is that for every 10 leads, we maybe get 3 qualified prospects that wind up being 1 sale. Or it could be 100 leads to 25 prospects that leads to 5 sales. Whatever the ratios are, we begin to realize within our industry that this is kind of what we're working with. And organizations try very hard to go from 10 to 3 to 1 to something like 10 to 4 to 2, okay, or something along that line, okay? Now, I've been working a lot more in the last decade on what I call the buying process. Now, the buying process is very, very similar, but it looks at it from the other side around. Okay, what we do is we keep the consumer or the customer front and center, and we look at this in a customer-centric kind of a manner. So what is the buying process? It's a description or a presentation of the customer's behaviors that occur before, during, and after the decision or use of the product. Okay, so what does the customer do? Now, in a typical buying process, what we'd like to be able to do is to identify what behaviors or what steps does the customer take and how often they take those steps. Now, why do we want to know how often that we take those steps? Is because if what we can do is we can understand the value of changing one of those steps, of improving the impact on one of those steps. Okay, then we have an opportunity to disproportionately influence our sales or usage or uptake or loyalty with the customer. So in looking at a buying process, it's usually a series of steps, and we have to ask ourselves, where do we win and where do we lose in those steps? So it explains the alternative pathways consumers might take. It identifies the critical points where we're seeing dropouts or people lose, where we lose and they leave our stream. And it reveals the highest leverage point or the highest point at which we might be able to impact our performance. Okay, now look, this idea has been around for a very long time. Okay, Phil Kotler began to have the buying process, and it began showing up in his textbooks around 1987. Okay, so this has been out there for a very long time. And he said that, look, most people, there's an origination, they realize there's a problem, they go out and they begin to evaluate options, they have a potential choice set, they make a choice, and then they review that choice, and they either continue to use it or they use something else. It's a very, very simple process that Philip Kotler was talking about. Now, I watched, he talked about it for a business process. He had 8 steps: problem recognition, general need recognition, product specification, et cetera, et cetera. But again, these are really generic, right? And if you're just reading this in a textbook and you haven't used it, you don't see the particular brilliance or the applicability that comes out of it. Now, if I look at the buying process, I say, okay, look, let's identify all the customer's behaviors and the results at each step in the behavior. So look at origination and I understand what are the triggers, what's making the problem occur. Why did people have this problem? What are the symptoms that they begin to notice? Okay, if I think about things like drug companies, they're masters at this, right? Is they've locked down on what symptoms you might be feeling, and then they tell you, oh, are your legs shaking all the time? Do you have restless leg syndrome? And then suddenly they're talking to you about a potential cure for it. But what you want to do is identify the behaviors or the steps that each customer goes through, map the customer's flows, and then list the behaviors that you want to change in that process. So as you're thinking about it, let's take it a little bit further down. But if I were to look at origination, Okay. All right. What's the reason for the recognition of the problem? What's happening? What did they suddenly realize was a problem? My foot hurt. I can't see. Okay. Something like that. If it's a pharma issue, you might be saying, okay, look, all of a sudden people can't see things. Are they looking at potentially having macular degeneration or something like this? So as they begin to see these problems, okay, they begin to go out and search. Now, look, they can search in a lot of different ways. Okay, if it's a foot problem, they might go to the general practitioner or the podiatrist or the physical therapist. So you start to recognize that, look, when somebody's foot hurts, they go out and they see one of these three groups. Now, look, if you start to find out that, hey, when they go to the podiatrist, 90% of the podiatrists recommend our therapy. But if they go to a general practitioner, only 10% of them recommend our therapy. You might want to start asking yourself, why are we losing with the general practitioners? What do we need to say to the general practitioners? How do we change the general practitioners? So looking at this buying process, you might look at different groups and say, you know, how do I take corrective action to get those groups to come on along with me? And the groups that are already coming to you, you maybe don't want to spend so much money on them, right? It might not be worth your while to continue to make those expenditures or increase your expenditures. And if you found that 90% of the people went to the general practitioner, but only 2% went to the podiatrist, well, maybe what you want to do is get more people to go to the podiatrist, because you get 9 out of 10 people that go to a podiatrist use our medication. So what we really want people to do is, if they're seeing these symptoms, don't go see your GP, go to a podiatrist, right? So these are the kinds of things that we're trying to do at each step in a buying process. So what a buying process is kind of insight into each step. And what you're doing is you're asking yourself, you know, what are the barriers for people to engage with us? You know, are we not available? Do we not have a message there? Is there somebody else making a decision there that is not in our favor? What are the enablers? If we could do this, if we could do that, if we could offer a cheap test, would people then take our medication? Okay, if they don't know if they have the disease condition, maybe somebody else, maybe some other medication is being prescribed. So very often, one of the big steps here is to understand what are the barriers in each box and what are the enablers, okay? And where are you winning or losing the most? Now look, if I find out that only 10% of the people go to the podiatrist, but 90% go to the general practitioner, seems like most of the action is going to be where? With the general practitioner. And unless I want to play in a niche market, I probably am going to have to follow that stream, right? What happens with that general practitioner, because they seem to have 90% of the market is going to see them, okay? And that's what I want to do. I want to be able to quantify this. So when I do a buying process analysis, I want to know the steps people go through, and I want to know what frequency they go through these steps, okay? And then what I want to know is what action should I be taking if I want to win more or lose less, right? So why I like the buying process, right, is it's a lot like presentation and commitment, where we're internally thinking about what do I say, but it flips it around just a bit. And what we're doing is looking at it from the consumer side and asking ourselves, how can we take the steps that a consumer goes through and be at the right place at the right time with the right message or the right product or the right benefits to be able to meet their needs, right? So now, why do I like this? Okay, and why do I like it more than virtually any other market research that we do as marketers? Is because it's not just meaningful, but it's actionable. You know, I used to work with a consumer products company that made coffee cakes and sweets. And they used to say that our typical customer is the 35-year-old female who is career oriented, that wants to come home in the evening and have a sweet treat to make them feel as though the long, hard day was worthwhile. Okay. All right. Now that was a very nice, meaningful representation of what the customer was. But how do I go find that customer? I can't find them tomorrow. But if I know the steps that people are going through, that they go talk to their general practitioner, now I go talk to the general practitioners, because I know that 9 out of 10 people go to the GP at some point. So this is the kind of thing that we're trying to do when we put the buying process together, is we're going to turn the sales force towards the most actionable points in the process, the points where the money is, the points where if we can flip it and we can change the ratio of success to failure, we have an opportunity for great impact. Okay? So it makes it easier for us to have appropriate conversations, also to have timely intervention, great predictability, right? Because I know how many people are at each step and what our ratios are, and it helps me to do a better job of planning. Okay? Now, I'm going to take this and I'm going to take it to the case that you all have. Right? Now, when we looked at the buying funnel up above, or the funnel management above, I talked about 10, 3, 1, 125, 5. Okay, so let me tell you the story of that case. And the protagonist in that case is me, okay? And the protagonist of the case was literally approached by the president of the university, at one of the universities that I'd worked with. And the president said to me, he says, look, he said, if I don't grow this graduate school, okay, I don't know if I'll get renewed. Now, at the time, I said, okay, well, I can help you with this. And so what was the first thing that I did? I went over and I began to look at the sales funnel, right? And I began to ask myself a series of questions. Now, I started with the outputs because that's all I had. I could look at last year's relationships. And what I found is that, okay, of the number of students that we accepted, okay, so look over here to your left as you're looking at the screen. Out of the number of students that we accepted, the percentage that took up our offer was about 10 to 12%. So only 1 out of 8 or 9 students, maybe even 10 students, was actually coming into our program. Now, that's a horrible thing to have happen. Only 1 out of 10 students was coming into the program. Now, look, I went over to the admissions director and I asked the admissions director, I said, well, why aren't they coming in? And the person's response to me was, I don't know. And I said, well, wait a second. I said, when you call them up and you talk to them and you ask them, hey, congratulations, you just got accepted to XYZ University. Congratulations. What do they say? And I'll never forget the response. The response was, well, I don't call them. I said, so how do you let them know they were accepted? We send them mail. Oh, you send them an email. Do they write back immediately? And how often do you follow up with other emails? I said, no, we send them registered mail. I said, registered mail? You mean you send it out to them on slow mail? Yes. And they get it with the other 300 things that they have in their box? Yes. And I said, what's our cost of recruiting one student at the university today? Now, at the time, this university was having a lot of problems recruiting, and our recruiting cost was about $9,000 per student. And I said, each one of these students that we recruit costs us $9,000 to get. I said, invite them over for a shopping trip. Invite them over to lunch. Do something, but they cost us $9,000 to get here, and we can't go the last mile to call them up and talk to them? And then I asked the next question. I said, after they've been interviewed, how long does it take for us to accept them? And in that case, you notice that it took 180 days to accept the student, or 120 days in the case. about 120 days to accept the student. I said, oh my God. So I said, this poor student has been through the interview process. They've had to bare their soul. They've had to think about their life and tell a story and jump up and down on one leg in front of your interviewers and tell you why you want to go to XYZ University, how it's been the dream of their lives. They've laid their souls bare to the admissions committee. And then for 6 months, they don't hear from you? No wonder your acceptance rate is as low as it is. No wonder you're only getting 1 out of 9 students, right? So what we began to do is we began to look at the interview process, right? Or the sales process. And the first thing I recognized is that it was broken at the end of the process. Is that we actually had a number of people that we accepted who just didn't take up our offer. Only 1 out of 10, 1 out of 9 was actually taking up our offer. Now, as we moved back, we moved into the interview process, okay, what we started to find is that almost 40% of the people that applied never came for an interview when they were called. Now, that seems really strange that somebody would pay the money, get onto our short list, and then not show up. And then I asked, how long does it take from the time that they fill in an application till you call them from an interview? They said about 90 days. So 90 days to get an application, 120 days, to get an interview, 120 days until we accept them. We're talking about 210 days for an admission cycle. Now I'm starting to get a real clear picture of where our problems were, right? So what was the first thing that I did when I was at the university? I came in and I said, okay, look, new rules. As soon as a person's application is complete, within 7 days, they get an interview, okay? Or they're kicked out of the process. They're told they're either in or they're out. Now they get an interview. Within 7 days of the interview, you're in, you're out, or we put you on a wait list. And we tried to have a very small wait list. But you're in, you're out, or you're on a wait list. All of a sudden, what did we see? Our acceptance rates went up 7x. Okay, so when we accepted somebody, the number of people accepting us went up 7x. I didn't have to change the process a great deal to be able to get massive returns just by looking at this sales process and beginning to ask these kinds of questions. The other thing we found is that when people applied, how quick did they get an interview? What we started to find was 90% of the people that applied got an interview. Okay, now what were we able to do? Over the ensuing 4 years, we increased the size of the graduate school at that university by a little over 700%. Okay, at the same time, I cut the marketing budget or our expenditures by 40%. So we cut the number of expenditures by 40%, but we increased the sales or the number of students coming in by about 7x. Okay, now look, if I go back further into the process, okay, climbing up the funnel just one more step, one of the key things we saw is that people generally came to an information seminar or some sort of an info session. Okay, so we really tracked seminar attendees, but because close to 9 out of every 10 people that applied came from seminar attendees. So one of the things I wanted to see was a lot of seminar attendees. Now, why did I want to see that? Because, early on in the process, I could go over and talk to my manager and say, how does the class look? And they'd say, pretty good. I say, well, wait a minute. Okay, how do you know it's pretty good? I needed the next question to ask them. So I had to ask them, I said, well, how many people attended seminars? How many people have been to the web? How many people have contacted us via print, via referrals? So what I began to do is look at the top part of the funnel. And what I would start to find is that if the relationship seemed abnormal between the top part of the funnel and the application, then I also had to look at what was going on there. So some of the things that I began to do is I said, okay, well, wait a minute. let's look at our application. And when I got to this university, they had 5, not 1, not 2, not 3, not 4, but 5 essays that the candidate had to fill out, and 1 video essay. Now, can you imagine having to turn in 6 essays to apply to a university? I can tell you that will be the last application anybody fills out. So I went over and I talked to the manager and I said, hey, look, why do you need all of these essays? And the person said to me, well, we want to know a lot about them. I said, look, you can find out an awful lot about people from 2 essays. What you really want to know is, will they plagiarize that essay? And can they write? Can they communicate their thoughts in the language you're going to be instructing? That's why you really have these essays. Yes, I want to know about the person. I want to know about their character. And if something, amazing rings through, very, very important to me. But the other thing I want to know from those essays is, do they have the integrity not to go out and search somebody else's essay out on the web? And secondly, can they actually write? Because they're going to do a lot of writing when they get to school. So, the questions I'm always asking, which is the right-hand side of that screen as you look at it, okay, is why aren't they coming to the seminars? Why aren't they applying? Is the message wrong? Is it delivered badly? Do we have too many steps in the application process? Okay, and if all of a sudden I find out that, look, we do a lot of interviews, but we don't even want to accept these people, well, then I'm going to ask myself, am I fishing in the wrong ponds? Have I got improper screening? Have I not been, right? These are the kinds of things that we're always asking in the questions. So, why do I, talk about a tool like this? Why did I use this method when I took over the graduate school at the university? And I did the same thing here at the Indian School of Business, as we employed the same sort of a process. Is because it was customer centric. Because by understanding that customer has to make decisions too, and they can't wait 50, 60, 90 days for us to get around to telling them that they are going to get an interview. And they can't wait another 120 days to find out whether they've been accepted or not. They want to know, they want to plan. And what we need to do is do them the dignity and the honor of giving them that luxury of time to organize their life. Because as they do, they can make their plans, they can make their arrangements, and it's much easier for them to execute on coming to your university. So my tip for the day, okay, is very, very simple, is that yes, we all have a desire to enhance our efficiency of our presentations. And we often look at the process very internally focused and say, what information do I need to do my job better? On the other hand, meeting the customer where the customer is and trying to take away the barriers at each and every step and create a nice, direct and full flow is often a preferred manner for the sales team to act in. Okay, so that's my presentation. Now I'll open up for any questions and answers.
Thank you, Professor Z, for conducting such an insightful session.
How was I on time? Perfect.
You were perfectly bang on time.
Man.
And to tell you that I have won the bet also.
Yes.
Yeah. So, Prof, we have a lot of questions. I will go in the same order as they have been asked. So the first question is, what are the revolutionary changes that we can see in the selling aspects post COVID-19? Because there is very less human interaction, and which is a key thing in the selling process.
Yeah, I think you've hit it with your follow-up to the question, right? Is that a lot of this stuff is going to be tech, not touch, right? So, firms have been trying to automate more and more of this process over the last 25 years. Right, I began getting involved in these sales processes 25 years ago, and you could just see that firms were trying to automate more and more of this with the idea that the automation was a way of being responsive. It was a way of being able to set metrics and be able to measure, and it was a way to ensure compliance, right? So it was a way to be able to track what your sales team was doing out in the field, that leads were being followed up on, and it was a way of being able to set metrics and know how your performance had gone year to year to year. And I don't think anything is changing in that recipe as we move into this new world, right? So the fact that sales calls are going to take place in video conference or over the telephone or firm to firm, and it's going to be a I hate to say it this way, but it could even be a robot talking to a robot at some point in time. So I think more and more of this is going to automate. I would caution firms away from being too automated and to lose that human touch, because to the extent that that human relationship goes away, the barriers to exit go away. Okay? It becomes a whole lot easier for people to be able to leave when they don't feel like there's a human touch on the other end. Now, what are some of the things that people are doing to be able to stay in touch is, continuous outreach, more purposeful outreach, the ability to be able to talk to people more regularly, to be able to send people information, link people to information sources that will help them to speed up their information acquisition. So, as I look at today versus when I began selling as a youngster, okay, back then I only had the brochures that were printed in my briefcase. Today, I have the ability to download reams and reams of information and send it out to the clients electronically. Right? And what we're seeing more and more is that firms are developing pitch packs in the background that are helping the salespeople to call on certain industries or certain client characteristics or what have you. That is, they're developing their own artificial intelligence to put together a pitch pack or an information book that will help that client or help that salesperson making that sales call.
So basically the key is how you nurture your leads, whether through physical medium or virtually. The key is how you nurture your leads and be in touch with them.
Absolutely. And I mean, look, a lot of what I was talking about in the buying process is how do we do this stuff very, very quickly and move through this process and keep in mind that that customer has got a problem. That's why they're there. They need something. That's why they're there. A lot of times, look, here in the universities, a lot of faculty members that are running programs in universities, I talk to them and they say, and I'll say, so when are you going to do your interviews? And they say, after every application comes in. I say, how long is your application period? 6 months. I said, so what do you think is going to happen with those people who applied at the opening? Some of those hard chargers who are absolutely interested and they want an answer because they're making plans and they're the type of early planners. What do you think they're going to say if they don't even get a call from you for 6 months? And this is the kind of thing that we're trying to do with these buying processes.
Our next question is asked by Mr. Karan Bhatia. In today's context, when the customers want to hold on to cash and are either postponing, asking for bigger discounts, how should a salesperson adapt and convert to a sale?
How do they adapt and convert to a sale?
Because people want to hold on to their cash or they're asking for large discounts, saying that, their business has affected. So how should a salesperson approach them and, convince them to go for the product?
So look, look, recessions are very, very difficult. Okay, they're difficult times. And, a lot of times your organization wants to cut back on their sales force expenditure, their advertising expenditure, they want to cut back on they even want to lower their prices just to be able to get certain volume within their organization. Okay, I advise against all of these things. I really just think that, look, during this time period where it's tough, it's going to be tough for your clients. okay? And knowing your clients better is probably the best thing that you can do. This is the time period where a lot of salespeople don't want to go out and talk to their customer because the customer is hurting so bad, and they know that the customer is going to ask them for a price discount. They're going to ask them for some sort of concessions. And this is where, look, that stuff's going to happen, right? This is when you really got to know your customer. You got to be on the same side with your customer, and you've got to be able to look at their business and say, look, maybe I'm not going to give you a price discount, but I can make this more palatable for you. I can deliver it in smaller units. I can hold it for a longer period of time for you. I can offer some of my dead resources that aren't working right now. I can have them work in your organization for a period of time because we're not that busy either. So if you need help and your product sells through a third party, maybe I can put some of my people down in your customer's account. Maybe I can put some of my people down in your, if you sell through retail, maybe I can put some people on the retail floor. Okay, while you may have a business-to-business transaction, I'll go down and look at your customer's customer and begin to help from that side and supply you more of that information about what are the customers saying at the tip of the spear and bring that information back to you. I may also look at you and say, okay, look, what I can do is I can deliver in smaller lot sizes. If cash is your problem and cash is king, then what I can do is I can make smaller, more regular deliveries, and it might be better for both of us, right? Because it's a better use of your cash, it limits your exposure and things like this. But this is a time when, by knowing your customer, understanding your customer, getting deep into your customer's business, the ideas or the creativity will grow, right? But if you don't talk to them, if you lay under your desk in a fetal position, you can be sure most of your conversations will be around price.
That's a very good insight, Prof. And I'm sure a lot of people would have this question in mind right now. Our next question is from Snigdha. What are some growing analytics and practices that have made sales processes more efficient?
Well, I think there's probably a half a dozen. I mean, look, there's lots of softwares out there, right? We all have used things like Siebel or Salesforce or things like this that allow us to visualize what our account teams are doing, right? And so this is a way of looking at who's been talked to, being able to accumulate histories and information about the customer's buying patterns and the customer's requests for information and the information that exists within our organization about those customers. And all of this has helped us to be more efficient at looking at our customer and doing a better job presenting or being more efficient in our sales calls, if you will. On the other hand, where I'm seeing tremendous growth is in the CCTVs and the we call it cell phone tracking and customer loyalty cards and things like this, where, look, I remember even as far back as 25 years ago when Gary Loveman took over Harrah's Casinos. Now, Gary Loveman and I used to do programs together like this, where we would do executive training and what have you. He was at Harvard, I was at the University of Texas. And all of a sudden, Gary became the head of customer insight management at the Harrah's Casinos and later became the CEO. Now, what did he do? He looked at his business and he said, look, he says, we're a small casino in Las Vegas. Now, what does everybody want in Vegas? Everybody wants big customers. They're looking for the whales, right? The big customers that are going to come in and spend a couple of $1 million at the table over the weekend, okay? Or gamble a couple of $1 million. And they might win, they might lose, but they make a lot of action. And that's what every casino is looking for. And they have a whole floor of very big suites and they have restaurants and services to cater to these people. But he looked at his casino and he said, look, we're a small casino. We don't have the best shows. We're not going to attract people because we don't have the lavish gaming areas and and what have you. So he said, look, our customer is a different customer. We're not looking for the whales. And what they did is they looked at their customer and they said, okay, the whales are going across the street to the Mirage or to Caesars. But what we have is we have the smaller player. Now, what does the smaller player want? Now, the smaller player would come in, and one of the most common things is they like slot machines. So what he did is he began a card where they put in their card into each slot machine, and they began to accumulate points for the number of hours that they played and the amount of play that they had. And every time they went to a table and played craps or blackjack or things like this, they also acquired points by the amount of time that they sat there in their average bet size. Now, what did he do? He began to take that information and began to mine that information. And what he started to find was, look, you know, if you're a craps player, okay, you like to go and you like to roll dice, and there's a lot of camaraderie in that game. So what he would do is he would offer a craps tournament, and all the people that their preferred game was craps, he would invite them out for a weekend for a craps tournament. And the next weekend, there might be a tournament for blackjack players, and he would invite the people who typically played blackjack or slots. And then what he did is he brought those people together. So all the people in the tournament, they'd hold a dinner for them. They'd have some free prize money that they gave away, but they let people get to know each other. And some of the higher rollers, they would invite them out for dinner, and they'd have 5, 6, 8, 10 of them. These people would begin to develop camaraderie. They would begin to develop an esprit de corps. And all of a sudden, they started to notice that these people that they had brought to dinner together started planning their trips together. We like that couple so much, we're going to go the same time that they're there next time. And all of a sudden, he began to develop this loyalty base. But it went even further than that. They began to look at, well, look, where does the crap player, what do they really want to spend their points on? Okay, do they want fast food service so they can move to the front of the line and the buffet? Are they looking to redeem their points for buffets or shows or golf or whatever it was? And this was the kind of insights that they began to develop. So what are the sort of things that I see happening? I see the collection of more and more data, the recognition that we want people, that we want to break our segments down, know what they're doing, know what steps they're taking even within our casino. Do they go to the crap table, the slot machine, or the blackjack table? And then what we want to do is we want to know how they want to spend their time. How do they like to spend their rewards? What kind of rewards are they looking for? Because, you know, it's like Gary Loveman turned to me one day as he was addressing a group of my students that I brought to the casino to learn about the industry. He said, you know what always bothered me is I go to the grocery store and I've had a dog. And he said, every week I go to the store and I buy 20 pounds of dog food. And every week they'd send me a coupon for cat food, right? And this is what he was trying to get away from in his casinos. Let me take one more question if you don't mind.
Yeah. So the next question is from Ravi Kumar. It's how the lead qualification can be improved when we are selling consulting services. It is not a physical product, but a knowledge-based offering. So how can we improve the lead qualification?
You know, that's really easy to do, okay? You know, look, I sell consulting and I sell consulting and I sell speaking, right? Similar business to what you're in. Now, you know, look, a few questions can tell you an awful lot about your client, right? So first question is, you might ask your clients, who else have you worked with when you've consulted before? You know, different firms have very, very, very different price points. And I won't give it away on this telephone call, but I know who are the highest priced firms. And when I hear those names go up, I know my rates are going to be higher for that client. Okay, similarly, you might ask yourself, what kind of commitments has the client made? Let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. Once upon a time, I got a call from a potential client. And they said, can you come to Hong Kong? Now, I was living in Austin at the time. Could you come to Hong Kong and give a talk for 2 hours on your paper on innovation? I said, yeah, sure, I could do that. Now I'm thinking, do I want to go that far for a 2-hour talk? And the guy says to me, he says, okay, well, this is a great paper. We really like what you've talked about. We've seen you talk before. And he said, we'd love to have you out here. He said, I said, okay, well, great. I'm interested in coming. And he says, how much? So now I could give him a number, but I need to ask some questions because you never want to price without knowing what it's worth to your client. So the first question I asked him, and I says, well, wait a second. I said, who's going to be at the event? He says, oh, these are our top. Well, how many of them? He says, well, it's 150 people will be in the room. And I said, well, where are they coming from? And he says about 110 of them are coming from the United States, 25 are coming from Europe, and the rest are coming from Asia. There's really nobody coming from South America or Africa. I said, okay. And I said, you say these are your top producers. I said, what are you talking about there? He says, oh, well, these are all people that are earning $750,000 or more. I said, oh, wow. I said, well, you probably have to fly them out there in business class, huh? And he says, no. He says, I'm flying them out first class. We're paying $15,000 a ticket. Now, when he told me that, what did I know? I knew that he was flying 110 people out there from the United States at $15,000 a ticket. Now I'm looking at $1.65 million just to get people there. Oh boy, now you can see where this is going, right? Now I look at it and I'm saying, okay, and what hotel are you staying at? And I knew the hotel, and I know he's paying $500 a night. And so, all of a sudden I look at this thing and I'm saying, this guy has got $2 million spent, and he wants to make sure that the talent coming in the door is good. Now, what happened to my fees?
Obviously, it will increase.
Yeah, let me just say that was the highest I ever charged for a day of my time.
Yeah.
2 hours of my time, excuse me.
So,
All right.
Phil, on behalf of the participants, I think it's at the stroke of 7.
All righty.
We are just across by 2 minutes. So in deference to your time, first, thank you very much for really enlightening us on how it's important to keep track of the customer and what he's going through and what is the processes that are going on in his mind. And it was a brilliant, many times we miss it as sellers. We just focus on ourselves. It's very inward looking. Yep. And you said it's important to look at the customer side very deeply. And your last example of this Hong Kong talk really, I think, gave the essence of what the message you had. So without further ado, we'll bring this wonderful talk to a close. And those who have got unanswered questions, Meenal will compile them and send them in a brief list to Professor Phil for his short answers. He's very busy, but I'm sure he'll pen down 3 or 4 lines for each of the 10 or 12 questions we have. So thank you all for attending, and we now sign off, and good day to you. Thanks, Phil.
Thank you all.